you are here to hear this first message. Now, pornography, it's invaded every aspect of our lives. You can find it on the shows that you watch on television. I'm not talking cable, I'm talking regular television. You can find it on the movies that you rent at Redbox or go to the theater to see. It's in video. You see it in sports. You see it in the songs that you listen to on secular radio. It's in the arts. It's in the news. It's in video gaming, even video gaming for kids. It's in advertising. What was that? But it's especially on the internet. That was our sound effect crew. And it's a form of sin that's out of control. I call it the cancer of the mind because it's destroying your soul. And it's nothing new. Sexual sins have been around ever since those rebelling angels were cast out of heaven. And it's a sin that isn't discussed very much in the church. It's usually ignored. But in Ephesians 5, the Apostle Paul addresses sexual immorality in the very first century church. So he wasn't afraid or ashamed to discuss it because he knew it needed to be addressed. But so many pastors and preachers today are very reluctant to do so. Let's get some slides up here. So we're going to look at Ephesians 5. We're going to look at the first 8 verses. I'll have them on the screen. And Paul begins by saying this. He says, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. He says, live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us, and he offered himself as a sacrifice to us, a pleasing aroma to God. Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's children. Obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do. For once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light. There's a lot there in those few words. Sexual sins are wrecking God's church and destroying God's people. And in Ephesians 5 that we just read, the term sexual immorality was defined by a single Greek word, porne. Now, porne means all kinds of different forms of sexual immorality. It's all just bundled into one package. A lot of people today say such and such is not in the Bible. Well, they just use one word, porne, and it described any kind of sexual immorality. It's all there under one word. And there are very different and very specific forms of sexual immorality that have popped up in culture, which in turn has affected the church, throughout the centuries. It's been different every century, the kind of sexual immorality that was taking place in the church. And in Paul's day, he addressed the sexual sins prevalent in the first century churches. And he did that in a letter to the Corinthians. Paul is telling the first century believers to abstain from having sex with prostitutes. That was the problem in his day, because there were numerous pagan temples in the city of Corinth. And the prostitutes in these temples would come out and they would lure people to come into the temple and participate in orgies and all kinds of sexual acts. And these were signs of worship to the idols and the pagan gods in these temples. And you got to remember, Christianity was brand new. It was something new. And Christianity was just coming to Corinth, the city of Corinth. Or Corinth. Corinth.
Emphasis on the core.
Emphasis on the core when we're talking about the horn. There were people in Corinth. Corinth? I don't get it. I'm going to say Corinth. Hope you will know what I'm talking about. There were people in Corinth or Corinth.
There you go.
And they were,
You got it.
I said it?
Yeah.
I said that before.
The first one you said, not the second one you said.
Corinth.
Yep.
There were people in Corinth who were being saved. They were coming to the Lord. They were coming to Jesus. But these new Christians continued to visit the prostitutes because that's what they've always done. It's just been a part of their life. And although they were new creatures in Christ, they kept behaving like their old selves, their old man. And Paul addressed that. So the first century church had their own specific issue of sexual sin, which was temple prostitutes. And that was a very specific sin prevalent at that time and at that age. Today, you and I are facing a problem that's 1,000 times worse than what Paul was dealing with temple prostitutes. It looks different. The devil has tailored it to our culture. He's tailored it to our weaknesses, to our means, to our wealth, to the time that we're living, and to the personality of what is kind of sexually accepted in our culture today. And if Paul were to write a letter to the church in America today, he would be warning us about pornography, not temple prostitutes. In our culture today, if you want to access pornography, you can do so as quickly as your heart desires. In fact, there's very little lag time between the desire to view pornography and the ability to do so. It's almost instantaneous. With today's technology, because of the internet, you can tap into pornography with your phone or your laptop or your tablet or your smartphone. Just about anything that can tap into the World Wide Web, you can be viewing pornography within 10 seconds, 15 seconds. You got an app, you just hit the app. In the moment that you feel the desire, you've got that temptation, you've got the lust, today's technology takes you there in an instant. Now, this wasn't true 20 or even 30 years ago. Back when I was younger. Back when my hormones were raging and I had all those youthful temptations, we didn't have instantaneous pornography. Back in my youth when I was outside of the will of God, if I wanted to look at dirty pictures, that's what we called them, I would go to a drugstore, and the drugstore would have an isolated section over to the side where they would have their magazines, and they'd be all enclosed, and no one could to get to them, and all the magazines would be wrapped up in cellophane, so you couldn't open them up and just look through them. And that's where you could purchase your magazines. It wasn't instant. If I wanted to see a naked woman, I would have to drive to Clancy's in downtown Norfolk. Go to the Mermaids on the Outer Banks, or go to any of the strip clubs along Oceana Boulevard in Virginia Beach. There were a lot of them, 20, 30. I never went to Portsmouth. I still don't go. We didn't have videos for every kind of sexual deviation 20 years ago. We didn't have perversion at our fingertips. And I can remember back then, some 20, 30 years ago, when I was back in my 20s, that an adult shop opened up in Newport News. And it sold all kinds of movies and magazines and toys and other adult items. And if I was tempted and if I lusted for pornography, I had to make plans to make this long drive to Newport News on my day off from work, driving 45 minutes each way, to go to probably one of the most run-down parts of the city of Newport News that exists then and probably even now, just to feed my lustful desire. It was not instantaneous. And if I were to go there, I would feel so guilty. I didn't want anybody to see me walking in. I didn't want anybody to see me walking out. And the cashier would conceal whatever you purchased by putting it in little brown bags with no labels on it. And it wasn't cheap. It was expensive. Fulfilling that same desire and that same sin today only takes about 15 seconds. And it's free. And it pops up everywhere. So 20 or 30 years ago, pornography wasn't the challenge to the church that it is today. Today it's a significant struggle for most men and women, including Christian men and women. Don't think that they're not involved in tempted. If you're a woman, you might be thinking, oh, not my husband. My husband would not do anything like that. My husband would not be tempted like that. Maybe other men, or my husband, or my boyfriend, he has no desire to look at that kind of trash. Well, don't believe that. If you're a man here tonight, you're probably uncomfortable that we're even discussing this, and you're thinking this is probably the worst sermon you've ever heard, and when is it going to be over? I want to get out of here. Pornography is destroying men in the church and women because it's so easy to access. Yes, women are also being lured to these sins of the flesh. It's a battle for both men and women in the church. And they're losing. It's a battle. For anyone with a conscience, pornography weighs us down with guilt. If you've got a conscience, if you've got a relationship. And it hinders us from fully living for God. If the church has a large percentage of men or women who are walking around with that kind of guilt and that kind of shame, and that regret, the anxiety of falling prey to their temptations, they begin doubting the sincerity of their faith. Why can't I get a hold of this? Why can't I get a control of this? Why can't I break free from this? And if they can't overcome it, do you think they're going to be responding to the call to share the gospel? No. They're going to avoid that. They're not going to share the good news of Jesus Christ because they're so overwhelmed with this guilt and this anxiety. It shackles them, it cripples them. They aren't going to step out for Jesus. So pornography is crippling men, it's crippling women, it's crippling the family, it's crippling the church. The elders of the church, they've got to fight this. The pastors of the church, they've got to fight this too. All the leaders in the church have got to fight this. It's a battle. Now, pornography is a subject rarely talked about in the church today, but Paul addressed the sexual sins in his day. We looked at that. And the church has looked at this as a man's problem. Deal with it. Fix it. And then come back to the church. But it's not a man's problem anymore. This has much to do with women as it has to do with men. It's a church problem. Are you going to be okay? The rate of women who have looked at pornography is rapidly increasing. Now, these are some statistics that Mark shared with us earlier in the week. According to a survey of more than 11,000 college-aged women, more than half, 52% of young women today are exposed to sexually explicit material by the age of 14. According to a study published by Cyber Psychology and Behavior, 62% of women have seen pornography by the age of 18, with 45% habitually watching pornography when they were between 13 and 17 years of age. It's awfully early. Exposures to porn during childhood are not just brief glimpses. You don't just take a peek. Some teen girls were viewing online pornography for a half hour or more at a time, almost every single day. And a large percentage of our children are viewing pornography by the age of 9 because it's so easily accessible. And there's nothing to censor it on their iPhones, smartphones, home computers. So if you're sitting here tonight and you're thinking this isn't a problem for me, don't be fooled. This is a problem that I personally cannot fully address, especially with just one message. So I'm going to be relying on Pastor Nikki and Pastor Mark to help me out in the weeks to come, dealing with this problem. We're going to touch on some solutions today, but this is just touching on them. We've got to get deeper into the meat later on. This is just the introduction, letting you know how serious this is. Not only this church, but every church. So I want to give you some tools to fight these temptations. We're going to find some tools within the gospel, so let's begin. Pornography exposes our hearts. Here's what Jesus had to say about it in Matthew 5, 27 to 28. It says, "You have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart."
Or looks at a man.
Or looks at a man. Any lustful look. Or a woman looking at a man.
Remember when Jimmy Carter said something about that years and years and years ago?
He got condemned.
Yeah, he did.
So Jesus is saying this isn't a behavioral problem. It's a heart problem. Sin isn't just ruining our lives, it's ruining our relationship with Him. And then in James 1, verse 14, this is what James adds. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. If we go back to Genesis and see how Adam and Eve, they blamed everyone but themselves for their sin. Jesus and James are basically telling us in Matthew 5 and James 1, no, you can't blame pornography on everybody else. You can't blame it on somebody else. It's a sin because of our hearts. We need God to cleanse our hearts. Our hearts need a victory. Our hearts need to overcome these temptations of lust. It's not behavioral modification. We see that behavioral modification is kind of taught in the clinics, but it doesn't work very well. Behavior modification can modify behavior, but it doesn't do anything to the heart. It doesn't change the heart. The hearts are still filthy. One of the things we learn about pornography is that it's ferociously addictive. It wants to own you. It wants to make you its slave. In Genesis 4:7, God is speaking to Cain, and he knows Cain's heart. And God says, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Sexual sins don't want to befriend you on Facebook. They aren't like wallflowers hoping that you'll come up and dance with them. Their only desire, pornography's only desire, is to rule over you, to kill you, and to destroy you. To destroy your mind, destroy your soul, destroy your heart, destroy your relationship with Jesus. And that's why God tells Cain, if you don't rule it, it will rule you. And there's spiritual pride and arrogance in some people. I have control over my life. I'm not weak like other people. I've got willpower. I can overcome this. Well, I've seen men and women in my years with willpower, and they've gone down in flames because of pornography. I've seen it in this little church numerous times in the 2 years that we have been here. Morgan Bennett is a scientist. He's a researcher. And he's written an article called The New Narcotic. Here's what he said. Neurological research has revealed the effect of internet pornography on the human brain. Pornography is just as potent, if not more so, than addictive chemicals such as cocaine and heroin. Now, if you think you have a hard time kicking cocaine and heroin, it's not going to get any easier just because you're hooked on pornography. Pornography is a type of polydrug that triggers addictive brain chemicals. We'll see that in a little video I'll show you in a few minutes. Enhancing its addictive propensity. So his research is saying that pornography gives you the high of cocaine and the relaxation of heroin. You can get hooked on that. 60% of the world already is. These brain chemicals, they awaken cravings in us for more graphic and more perverse pornographic content. So once your brain is kind of satisfied with getting so much pornography, it needs more. It's got to see more, you got to spend more time watching it, and you don't just see the little light stuff anymore, you start looking at the more perverse pornography. You're looking at things you should never be looking at in the first place. So pornography isn't something you just happen to pick up from time to time. It woos you, it lures you, it gets its fangs in you. And it not only wants to own you, but like a drug, it's never satisfied. It's never enough. It wants more and more and more. That's why a man or woman might say, you know, I've got this under control. But a year later, you talk to them and they're saying, I'm the worst human being ever. How did I ever have this happen in my life? God must not love me anymore. Pornography pushes the boundaries of our heart. It's a spiritual heart attack. Pornography is something that you can't just accept it or reject it. It's not something that you can flirt with. You can't just take a little peek here or there to satisfy your curiosity. You know, thinking that you can go back to just being yourself again as soon as you take a little peek. That's not how it works. It owns you. So for the rest of tonight, I just want to give you a little help. This is just a startup package tonight. We're going to go deeper in the weeks to come to help you, equip you for this battle. This is just the basics. You know, like I said, the meat is still to come. And it's because of God's grace that we are able to overcome this addiction, just like any addiction in our life. So how do you fight the temptation of pornography? Well, first of all, you got to view it as a temptation, not as something that you struggle with, but this is a war. It's not something you're struggling. It's a war. You've got the fight of your life ahead of you once you're hooked. 1 Peter 2:11 says, Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners, now that's us, we live here in this world, to keep away from worldly desires and wage war against your very souls. Warning us, this is one of those things that wages war against your very soul. Now you might want to call, I struggle with pornography. You might call it a struggle, but it's already waged war on your soul. You need to arm yourself because this is a war. It's a battle. Your eternal survival is at stake, and you've got to protect your heart. And you can't do it passively. You've got to actively address it. It's not a struggle. It's a war. You know, we weren't in a struggle with ISIS. That's all you heard about in the news. In a struggle with ISIS, we were at war with ISIS. Look at the number of lives that were lost because of the news media not really giving it the attention and the truth of what was happening over there. A lot of lives were lost. It's not a struggle. We're in war with pornography. Pornography wants nothing to do with you sharing your heart with Jesus. It wants all of you. You know, Jesus, he wants your heart. So which is it going to be? Is it going to be Jesus or is it going to be pornography? It cannot be both. Here are a couple ways we can wage war against this cancer, pornography. First of all, the church is a family. It's a brotherhood. And one of the ways you can arm yourself is to align yourself with Christian brothers or sisters of the same sex who can come alongside and they can fight with you. You don't want to try to fight this alone, especially if it's already devouring you. You want to find or line yourself up with men and women who come alongside you because they have experienced the same battle with their own hearts. They've gone through the same thing that you're going through. Now that's kind of hard for our little church to do. We don't have a lot of membership that we could do that. But you can find other people. You've got friends, you've got neighbors, they've got online programs, they've got addiction groups in the areas. So there's places that you can get the help and the support from other Christian brothers and sisters. But this means you're going to have to be vulnerable, because you've got to sit down across the table from a couple of people and you're going to share with them what's been going on in your life and how you're hooked on this addiction, what's going on in your heart. And that can be very frightening. Not something you can easily do. And second, let's get practical. You know, there's no technological product that doesn't have some kind of redeeming quality. Because of the World Wide Web, this is a major problem for the church. But there's internet software that keeps you from visiting and looking at adult sites. You know, the software may not be your savior, but they're a great tool. It's a wonderful weapon that you can put into your tool belt, your armor. And you got to put on the whole armor of God. Well, sometimes your armor might include this software. And there will be times, even when you have this software on your computer, when you're tired and you're depressed, feeling those lustful desires, and you want to go and look at certain websites, but you can't, because the parental control software on your computer is not going to let you. So you get angry, you get mad, because you want to have something that you can't have, and you become like children and throw tantrums, and you're going to find a way to sin. You're going to get your way around this one way or another, but the software is going to prevent you from letting it get a hold of you. The parental control software protects your soul. And you can put it on your phone, same thing, same kind of protection. Another way to fight pornography is to think of Christ and his agony, suffering on the cross for your impurity. You know, if you start wanting to look at the images on your computer, well, if you can get that image of Christ in your mind, boy, that's going to take that desire away from you. And fourth, you need to view others, especially those that you're attracted to sexually, as eternal beings. You know, when you view porn, you objectify people. You cease to see them as God sees them. They're eternal beings made in his image. If you think of them as eternal beings made in his image, you're going to lose that lustful desire to gaze at them and lust over them. So it's important that we don't perpetuate an industry that thrives on suppressing people. That's all that it does. It probably makes more money than just about any organization in the world today. Sex trafficking is one of the most immoral occurrences growing rapidly in the world today, and it's all rooted in pornography. You would not believe how many young ladies, 9, 10, 12 years old, 14, and young boys, are right here in Hampton Roads being sold for sex purposes. And finally, if you're already caught up in sexual sin, you know, don't pray for a change in behavior. Pray for a change in your heart. God needs to change your heart. And one such sinner in the Bible that needed a change of his heart because he had all kinds of sexual problems was King David. In Psalms 51, 9, 12, David is crying out to God to cleanse him and to change his heart. So this is his prayer, and let his prayer be your prayer. He says, hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain me with a willing spirit. So that's just the beginning tonight. Let's go ahead and show that little video. It's going to kind of give you a little bit more information on that study. Started about 1:05. So you can see why people become addicted to pornography.
Great, it's funny that that video was actually blocked on your YouTube page. I had to get Mark to log in under his login.
Really?
Put your own strategies in place, huh?
This has got the word porn in it.
Oh, I would imagine, yeah.
And we've got, big metal balls with spikes on the end of them. But I want to talk about a new drug. The thing is, pornography is not all that new. It's been around since the beginning. So why are we calling it a new drug? Well, that's because scientists are just now, over the last decade, beginning to understand what pornography really does, how it affects our brains, and psychologists are understanding how it affects our behaviors, and sociologists, our society. And so we're just beginning to understand that it can be just as addictive as drugs, as hard drugs. And we'll explain how, because I know that there's some skeptical eyes out there kind of thinking, wait a second, drugs, really? I don't sniff it, I don't inhale it, I don't inject it. How is pornography like a drug? But first, you're probably wondering, we're teenagers, why are you talking to us? Why are you talking to us about pornography? It's an uncomfortable topic, right? In fact, I bet you anything that as you guys came into this, as you kind of found out what this was going to be all about, you thought to yourself, oh boy, here we go. Shoot, how do I get out of this? I mean, not a lot of people like to talk about it, but it's becoming more and more of an issue, and we've got to deal with it. And here's why we're talking to you guys. The largest group of internet porn users is youth, ages 12 to 17, you guys. 90% of the people watching this video right now fit into that group. Do you know what the average age of exposure is for pornography? 11 years old. 11. And 9 out of 10 youth, ages 8 to 16, have seen it. So we know what it is. We know what it is. We're not here to define it. Get this. Every second, now, 30,000 people are viewing online pornography. And what was the largest group of internet porn users? 12 to 17. So you see how a lot of those are there. And girls, watching this right now, listen up. A lot of you tune out for topics like this. You can think, okay, it's a guy's issue. It's not my issue. Recent statistics show that 30% of addicts are women. That number has skyrocketed over the last decade, and it's growing. So current research is showing that pornography is a drug, and that it can lead to addiction. But some of you are looking out there going like, well, how? It doesn't make any sense. How? Again, I don't sniff it, I don't smoke it. Well, how? Let me show you. Pornography goes in through the eyes, in through the iris, and triggers a release of chemicals in your brain. Chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, oxytocin. Now this is a science class, but you may have heard of some of those. Now these are natural chemicals that your body produces. These chemicals are needed. When you do drugs, hard drugs, or look at pornographic material, your brain is overloaded with these chemicals. after you keep looking at porn, your brain gets used to those high amounts and builds up a tolerance. Those same images that once gave you a rush don't have the same effect anymore. In order to get that same rush, it not only takes more of it, but it also takes a more hardcore version of it. Your brain becomes dependent on that rush of chemicals and literally rewires itself to think that that's normal, and so you cannot function without it. That is addiction. The same process happens with cocaine and heroin. They can't stop.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Good intro, Ray.
I don't know how to end this other than more to come. Thank you. So that's our intro. We're taking it seriously. We're taking it seriously because it's been a problem in this church. We've had a number of men and women have been hurt in this church. We can't let it continue, so. There's only so much we can do. At least we can address it. It's not a struggle, it's a war. It's declared war on this church. And we're not gonna let it win, so. Glad we've got some troopers here tonight. Yeah, Jeff.
How come this stuff can't be censored like it is in China and other places like that? See, these people, they used the First Amendment so that they could publish all of this stuff and put it out. And the First Amendment was never meant for that kind of garbage to be put out. If you did that back in colonial times, they'd probably hang you for it.
Burn you at the stake.
Right. Trump happened to bring something up about it, that he was gonna try and see that if he could get it censored so young people couldn't get a hold of it.
Well, as you just saw, that's the biggest group watching pornography right now, between 12 and 17 years of age.
There are censors that you can put on it, but parents seem to know how to do it.
Well, we
But you
talked
take-
about the software, but
You take adolescent boys and put that stuff on the internet where they're gonna look at it.
they are.
Well, that's why it says that the largest group is 12 to 17.
Right.
And I might add, how early is it that people, young people, are obtaining phones?
Yep.
So you got a smartphone, you got a gateway to pornography. Unless, like Jason said, you got parents who programmed your phone so that you can't get to it. Because if you're a kid, all you gotta do is just put in a word,
Just give them a dumb phone.
and it'll go right to it.
And also
Dumb
get
phones.
rid of internet at home. You save a lot of money, and you just go to the library like I do if you need to get on the internet. And in the library, they was
Yeah.
block those sites automatically.
I had a
So
talk
just get
one
rid
day
of your
with-
internet and start reading books.
I had a talk one day with a millennial at work. And,
He educates you?
yeah, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. He told me he started fooling around with movies and stuff when he was about 8 years old. And I ain't gonna tell you what all he told